Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are here to talk about what is actually the first Western I ever saw. One of the grimiest movies I've ever seen to this day, and of course we can't forget the movie that gave us the iconic intro to Warren G and Nate Dogg's Regulate. That's right, today we are talking about how 1988's Young Guns came to be, everything that makes it awesome, and its legacy all these years later. So my history with Young Guns began when I was 5 or 6 years old, and my mom decided to show it to me because it was her favorite movie of all time. Now, what business did my mom have showing me Young Guns at such a young age? Who's to say? But she was right to show it to me because I was instantly obsessed with everything about this movie. Like I said, it was the first Western I ever saw. And I can remember being a kid and my family trying to show me other Westerns like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly or True Grit, and I just kept thinking, this isn't Young Guns. What can I say? I was a little idiot. But in all seriousness, I know that Young Guns isn't like the most popular movie, certainly wouldn't be considered a classic Western in most circles, would maybe even be looked down on by a lot of people, but man, as soon as I turned this movie on and it opens with the sepia-toned introductions of all of the cast, I'm just hooked. Especially when it ends with them just firing their guns directly at the camera. It's pure schlock and fun, and it lets you know up front that this is going to be more of an action movie that takes place in the Old West than it is a traditional Western. But before I start diving too deep into everything I love about Young Guns, let's go back in time just a bit and learn about how this movie came to be. While living in the Southwest during the 1970s, screenwriter John Fusco began to become really interested in both Billy the Kid and the Lincoln County War of 1878. So much so that he spent a full 5 months doing research on both events in New Mexico. And while working for director Christopher Kane on another project, he showed Kane the first 16 pages of what he had, and Kane was immediately sold on the idea. At the time, Kane had a first look deal with Columbia TriStar, meaning they got first dibs on any project that Kane tried to develop. And they actually passed on Young Guns. In their defense, Westerns hadn't really been in style since 1980 with the failure of Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate. That's not to say that Hollywood wasn't making any Westerns, it's just that they were few and far between. So with Columbia having passed, Kane and Fusco decided to go DIY-ish. They took the script to Joe Roth at Morgan Creek Productions, who agreed to finance the movie independently at a budget of $11 million, which even adjusted for inflation in 2025 would be just under $30 million. So a very sensible budget no matter how you slice it. As for the casting, it sounds like originally Kane had it in mind that Estevez would be Doc and Sutherland would be Billy the Kid. That is until Estevez called Kane and convinced him he was the only person that should be playing Billy the Kid in this movie. And Kane agreed. It sounds like all of the other roles fell into place pretty easily. Lou Diamond Phillips didn't even have to audition for the role of Chavez. And on February 8th, 1988, Young Guns went into production, filming in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with the town of Cerrillos, New Mexico being dressed up to be the town of Lincoln. It seems like the cast and crew all had a great time making this movie. It sounds like there was actually a prank war between all of the actors that lasted throughout all of production, and it began with Estevez sending his co-stars boxes that appeared to be gifts from the studio, but instead were filled with cow dung. Lou Diamond Phillips also had the makeup team put makeup on a sheep and sent it to Estevez's trailer since he was grieving over a recent breakup. It was also very common for the cast to get drunk together after rapping and end up playing music together, and of course forcing Lou Diamond Phillips to sing La Bamba was apparently incredibly common. If you didn't know, Lou Diamond Phillips had actually just played Richie Valens in the biopic La Bamba just a year earlier. When filming concluded towards the end of March in '88, it sounds like everyone walked away feeling very proud and excited about the movie they'd made. When Young Guns was released into theaters on August 12, 1988, it landed at the #1 spot on the box office and brought in just a little over $7 million in its first week before going on to make a worldwide total of $56 million. Although this could be wrong, as it was only listed on Wikipedia and Box Office Mojo only had the domestic total at 45.6, but either way, this movie was a financial success. And while Young Guns was a hit at the box office, it was met with mixed critical reception. It currently hosts a 43% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a score of 50 on Metacritic, but as you can see, the audience score is much higher, which I think makes sense. I think a lot of the critics came into this movie wanting a traditional Western, but what they got was something a little more violent, a little less optimistic, and of course, I'm sure everyone was side-eyeing the inclusion of young, handsome stars in the lead roles, especially actors like Emilio Estevez that had been included in the Brat Pack. And with all of that out of the way, now seems like the perfect time to dive into Young Guns and talk about everything that made it awesome. Like I mentioned, Young Guns opens with this awesome little character introduction montage that ends with all of the regulators shooting their guns at the camera. It's just a badass way to open this movie. And before I dive deep into the plot, let's just pause and talk about all of the behind the scenes aspects that make this movie great. First of all, director Christopher Kane really knew how to stretch his budget. This movie definitely doesn't look expensive, but it does look dirty and grimy, and exactly what this movie about dirty, grimy boys on a revenge mission should look like. And cinematographer Dean Semler obviously understands dirty and grimy revenge missions. At this point in his career, he'd already shot both The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome, and we've actually talked about several movies that Dean Semler has shot on this channel, including The Three Musketeers and Last Action Hero. Go check those out if you haven't. All of this to say that I think Semler again knocks it out of the park here. And let's just stop for a second and appreciate how pretty this shot is. Also, how funny is it that Semler also shot the movie Cocktail, which opened the week before Young Guns and was the #2 movie at the box office when Young Guns was released. So Semler had the #1 and #2 movies in the US, and that's kind of cool. And actually, speaking of Cocktail, did you know that Tom Cruise has a very brief cameo in Young Guns? That's him right there. And the final portion of the behind the scenes aspects that I want to talk about is the score, which was done by Anthony Marinelli and Brian Banks. And actually, these two were not the first ones hired to score this movie. That would be the late great James Horner, whose score was rejected for being too Irish sounding and not enough of a traditional Western score. The reason I find this funny is because Marinelli and Banks delivered a score that sounds like this. I've seen quite a few Westerns in my life at this point, and this is the only one with a score like this. And you know what? I think it really works for this movie. It sets it apart from other Westerns and kind of makes it feel new and different. And it's their score that carries us from the intro into our first proper scene in the movie, where we're introduced to Keifer Sutherland as Josiah Doc Scurlock and Terrence Stamp as John Tunstall. And of course, they see Emilio Estevez's Billy running from the law and decide to take him in. And from there, we get our proper introduction to each of the regulators, beginning of course with Lou Diamond Phillip as Jose Chavez and Dermot Mulroney as Dirty Steve Stevens, who's a weird amalgamation of a few different historical figures, but he's primarily based off of Dirty Dave Rudabaugh, who we actually meet and hang out with in Young Guns 2. Which is one thing I suppose we should get out of the way as well. While Young Guns might be based on historical events, I would say that on average, for every one thing it gets right, it gets 3 to 5 things completely wrong or makes them up. For example, in the movie, John Tunstall is older, right? Looks to be in his mid to upper 50s. He's very proper and wise and likes to teach the boys who work with him to be proper young men. However, in real life, John Tunstall was only 24 years old when the events of the movie take place. In fact, the only regulator of his that he was older than was Billy the Kid. There were also 11 regulators in real life, but this was brought down to 6 to simplify things. And look, the point I'm trying to make is if you're a history buff watching Young Guns, you're probably not going to enjoy it. And I'm not really a history channel, so I won't be calling out every single historical difference, only a couple of things that I find interesting or things that I think add to the story. Now, where was I? Oh, right, the introduction of the regulators. So we start with Dirty Steve and Chavez in the middle of an argument, with Steve being a racist asshole and spitting chewing tobacco every 5 seconds. And their argument is interrupted by Charlie Sheen, who's playing Dick Brewer, and he quickly breaks the fight up as John, Doc, and Billy arrive back at the farm, where Billy is immediately put to work and tested by all of the regulators. My favorite being Charlie here, played by Casey Siemaszko, telling Billy all about the regulators and being kind of a smartass, trying to show how smart he is using words like pugilist. Of course, he shuts up pretty quickly when he learns that the reason Billy was taken in is because he killed someone, which leads to my favorite joke in the movie. As the boys sit around for dinner that night, Charlie and Dirty Steve decide to make fun of Billy just a little bit, which Billy doesn't really find funny at all. And once the boys apologize to John and Billy, saying, "Just hacking on you, that's all."
Yeah, we was just hacking on you.
They ask Billy why he killed someone, to which he replies,
"He was hacking on me."
That's just an all-time great response. Honestly, this movie does a great job of making Billy the Kid seem like the coolest, smartest, suavest outlaw and gunfighter that's ever existed. Because after dinner, John likes to make the regulators each take turns reading out loud from the newspaper. Like I said, his goal is to turn these boys into proper men. And when it comes to be Billy's turn to read, he declines before John forces him, and everyone in the room expects him not to be able to read, and then he just busts out this full paragraph with no problems or stutters along the way. way. The next morning, the main conflict of the movie presents itself when we meet Jack Palance. Truly, what an actor. But like I said, this introduces us to our main conflict because both Murphy and Tunstall own beef outfits and run a store selling dried goods. Although we never see either store, I'm realizing in retrospect, or like any cows even really. Okay, whatever. The point is that these two don't like each other, and Murphy has a lot more people siding with him. So this is just a tense little standoff to set up our main conflict. And then we cut ahead an indeterminable amount of time to a new boy showing up at John's house and wanting to join the regulators, and we learn his name is McCloskey. And he used to work for Murphy but claims to have been fired and now wants to work with John. More on McCloskey in a bit. That night, John and the regulators head into town for a town New Year's Eve celebration. And this has always been a favorite sequence of mine, from Charlie lying about becoming a doctor, to Billy meeting Pat Garrett, to Doc falling in love at first sight with Yen Soon, played by Alice Carter. And we get this great scene with John Locke, I mean Terry O'Quinn, telling Doc that Murphy took Yen Soon as payment for a ruined shirt from a dry cleaner, and that she's now, quote, house entertainment. Okay, final thing about the New Year's Eve party. I also love when Charlie beats this dude up. That following morning, as John and the boys make their way home, John is ambushed and murdered by Murphy's men, which leads to the regulators being deputized to go after the men who did it, only things go bad pretty much immediately. Because when Billy goes to serve the first warrant to Henry Hill, instead of serving him the warrant and, arresting him, he puts a pistol through his zipper and pretends to be taking a leak before turning around and shooting Hill, which leads to a lot of tension between Billy and Dick moving forward. And I want to just talk about these two for a moment, because in real life, Emilio Estevez and Charlie Sheen are brothers. But the thing I find interesting about this is that Emilio is the older brother, and in this movie, the roles are almost reversed. And I just think these two have excellent chemistry together in every single scene they share. We are then treated to one of the most violent and visceral scenes in the movie, for me at least. We see two men riding through the woods looking for the regulators, only to be ambushed by them, and during the standoff, McCloskey does two strange things. First, he tells Dick they should change their course, and then he gives one of the men a look that Billy happens to catch, and well, that's all she wrote for McCloskey, because Billy realizes he's been working for Murphy the entire time. And I can't show it in the video, obviously, but the death of McCloskey is one of the most visceral on-screen deaths of my entire childhood. Like, it was a rite of passage to get to watch this movie in my house growing up because of how violent it was. I mean, Keifer Sutherland just stands there covered in blood and brain matter for the rest of the scene. Young Guns was a movie that loomed large in my house growing up, and in my relationship with my mom, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Before we owned Young Guns on VHS, she would rent it so often that the video store clerk somehow got her a Young Guns shirt, and according to her, she wore it until it fell apart. I never even got to see it. So if by chance there are any vintage t-shirt sellers out there, or bootleg shirt sellers out there with a lead on a Young Guns shirt in XL, please let me know in the comments. So after the other two men are taken out, our boys decide that they're now operating outside the law and go into hiding, and we get probably the most famous scene in the entire movie, the peyote sequence. Apparently one of the questions all of these guys got the most about this movie was whether or not they really did peyote, but the prop peyote used in the movie was just cream of mushroom soup. The peyote sequence just rocks from start to finish though, from Chavez's face paint, to Billy losing his gun, to Doc trying to freestyle a poem about butterflies, Charlie throwing up, and of course, Dirty Steve losing his mind and shooting at an invisible giant chicken. The best part of this is that Dick doesn't participate, and the next morning he's just watching his friends trip, and like a good boss, he still makes them all get on their horses so they can move on. Where they run into Buckshot Roberts, who's now chasing the boys down, because in a turn of fate, the boys have been stripped of their deputization and now have a bounty on their heads for the murders they've committed. So while the boys do have a warrant for Buckshot Roberts here, he doesn't care because he's got a bounty for them. This whole shootout is really fantastic. I especially love Dick trying to goad Billy into going after Buckshot himself, and Billy's very into the idea for all of 2 seconds, and unfortunately this shootout leads to the death of Dick, which makes Billy the new de facto leader of the regulators. As the group decides what to do next, we get just an excellent monologue from Lou Diamond Phillips about how it was Murphy's corruption that led to the army raiding and butchering Chavez's mother and her tribe just a few years earlier. And Phillips just nails this monologue. There's so much pain and anger in his voice, and the way the tears well in his eyes is just incredible acting. And like I said, I know people kind of view this movie as campy schlock, but there's not a single person that can tell me the scene isn't moving and fantastic. Well, except for Billy the Kid apparently, because he brushes off Chavez's story and insists insists that they continue their quest for vengeance against Murphy. So the boys sneak back into Lincoln and take out Sheriff Brady before going up to see Alex McSweeney and his wife Susan, played by Sharon Thomas Kane. But Alex tells the boys in no uncertain terms that they are screwed. Everyone is after them. Their end goal of avenging John feels so far from possible, and his only real plan now is to try and reach the president to get him to see the corruption that's taken over Lincoln and maybe do something about it. But Billy and the boys decide they can't wait for that kind of long-term plan, toss their badges at Alex's feet, and go on their way. We then get a couple of little one-off scenes, including the gang deciding what to do next, and my favorite part about the scene is Dermot Mulroney bathing yet still being covered in filth, and the fact that he keeps picking at and dripping dirty water into this open wound. It doesn't have anything to do with the plot or anything, it's just gross, and I feel like we need to give Mulroney credit for playing the dirtiest man that's ever existed, because he absolutely nails it. Charlie then visits a prostitute, and I learned in doing research that this was originally part of a much longer scene where it's revealed that the woman is actually Charlie's mother. While Charlie is visiting with the woman, Billy kills another bounty hunter that's after them, but not before messing with him first, taunting him and removing bullets from his gun. It's just a fun little scene, and after murdering this guy, the boys book it to Mexico, where Charlie gets married to a woman he just met, and Pat Garrett shows up out of nowhere telling the boys that Alex is going to be assassinated the next day. So the boys book it back to Lincoln to try and save Alex and Susan. Which brings us to our final sequence of the movie, and I just love everything about this final standoff from start to finish. From the way that Alex is furious that they're even there, to the realization that they've been set up and are being surrounded, Billy's banter with the other side and him taking out random people and laughing about it, Charlie's reaction to John Kinney arriving, and Charlie's full-blown mental breakdown where he starts shooting and crying. I love the way that Alex says that being in a gunfight would negate his life insurance policy, and how when Murphy finally shows up, Yen immediately runs inside to be with Doc. But my favorite moment is a subtle one, actually. It's Chavez sneaking out without saying a word, and we don't know why or where he's gone, and I love that everyone immediately assumes the worst once they realize he's gone. And of course, Dirty Steve takes this very personally, as these two just patched up their relationship. And once the house is lit, that's when the scene kicks into overdrive. The boys throw Billy out the window in this trunk, which is dope as hell, and then it's just guns a-blazing non-stop till Chavez returns with the horses. And even though Dirty Steve dies before he can get away, it just makes me a little happy to know that he got to see that Chavez didn't actually abandon them. In fact, he saved them. And we lose a lot of our main players in this final battle. Dirty Steve, Charlie, and Alex all don't make it, but Chavez, Billy, Doc, and Yen do. But not before Billy doubles back and takes out Murphy with a clean headshot. And we get this nice little historical epilogue read to us by Doc that lets us know where everyone ends up, and the movie ends with Billy riding off alone. So 35 plus years later, what is the legacy of Young Guns? Well, like I've made it very clear throughout this movie, for me, it's an absolute classic. It's a movie I grew up with and have seen so many times that it's ingrained in my DNA. And though this movie didn't get great reviews or become a giant hit at the box office, it still had plenty of fans, so much so that we got a sequel, Young Guns 2, just a few years later in 1990. And if I'm being completely honest, I almost like the second one more, but you guys are gonna have to wait a little bit to hear me talk about Young Guns 2. And just a few months ago, Emilio Estevez officially announced that Young Guns 3, Dead or Alive, would begin shooting in fall of 2025, with him both starring and directing. And I am quite excited to see what this movie ends up being. Very curious to see if Keifer Sutherland makes any sort of return. A spoiler for Young Guns 2, but his character dies in that movie, even though Doc Scurlock lived to be 80 years old in real life. I don't know. If I was Emilio, I'd just ignore his death and bring him back on. But also, I just kind of like Keifer Sutherland as Doc. But let me know in the comments, do you love Young Guns as much as I do? How about Young Guns 2? Are you excited for Young Guns 3? Do you have a lead on a Young Guns shirt for me? If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching. It truly means the world. I'm Brandon, and this is Born to Rant. And as a reminder, this is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos. So please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all of your childhood favorites every Thursday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.